The room smelled like old leather and polished mahogany, the kind of scent that clings to places where fortunes are divided and families break apart. I sat in the corner chair of Hartwell and Associates, my hands folded in my lap, trying to make myself smaller than I already felt. The attorney, Mr. Kenneth Hartwell, cleared his throat for the third time, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he prepared to read my father's will. My brother Derek stood by the window, his expensive suit catching the gray November light filtering through the Portland rain. He'd flown in from New York that morning, and somehow in the 6 hours since Dad's funeral, he'd already managed to make everyone feel like guests in his inheritance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My mother Patricia sat in the center of the room, her black dress immaculate, her face a careful mask of grief that hadn't cracked once during the service. Beside her, Derek's wife Vanessa scrolled through her phone with barely concealed boredom. My younger sister Claire perched on the arm of Mom's chair, her eyes red from actual tears. She was the only one who'd loved Dad the way I had, the only one who remembered him as more than a checkbook. Mr. Hartwell opened the leather portfolio with practiced solemnity. To my wife Patricia Brooks, he began, I leave the family home in West Hills and all furnishings therein, along with the investment portfolio managed by Sterling Financial Group. My mother's lips curved into a smile so slight it could have been a trick of the light. To my son Derek Alexander Brooks, I leave the commercial properties on Morrison Street, the vacation home in Bend, and controlling interest in Brooks Development Company. Derek's posture straightened with satisfaction. He didn't look at me, but I felt his smugness radiating across the room like heat from a furnace. To my daughter Claire Elizabeth Brooks, Mr. Hartwell continued, I leave the sum of $200,000 for her education and future endeavors, to be held in trust until her 25th birthday. Claire squeezed Mom's hand, relief washing over her face. Then there was silence. Mr. Hartwell turned the page, and I watched his eyebrows rise just slightly. The kind of reaction lawyers train themselves not to have. To my daughter Natalie Rose Brooks, he read slowly, I leave my personal research journals, all documentation related to Project Meridian, and the contents of Safety Deposit Box 743 at Columbia Trust Bank. The room erupted before I could process the words. Derek spun from the window, his face flushing red. Research journals? That's it? Dad left her notebooks. He laughed, but it was the sharp kind that cuts. Vanessa looked up from her phone for the first time all afternoon. Your father's personal papers, Mr. Hartwell said calmly, along with specific instructions that only Miss Brooks is authorized to access the safety deposit box. The contents are sealed by legal directive. Derek crossed the room in 3 strides. This is ridiculous. He left her scraps while the rest of us got actual assets. Mom, are you hearing this? My mother's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes when she looked at me. It does seem unusual, Charles. Perhaps we should contest the distribution. I found my voice, small but steady. I don't want to contest anything. I just want to understand what Dad meant. Derek leaned over Mr. Hartwell's desk, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Understand this, Natalie. Whatever's in those journals, whatever's in that box, it belongs to this family. Not just you. Mr. Hartwell closed the portfolio with deliberate calm. Mr. Brooks, I must inform you that your father's will is legally binding and quite explicit. The materials designated for Miss Brooks are hers alone, with no provisions for family access or review. That's when Derek turned on me fully, his face twisted with something I'd seen building for years. Get out. What? I whispered. Get out, you're not family. You never were. Real family contributes. Real family builds something. What have you ever done except hide in laboratories pretending to be important? Derek, Claire said sharply, but he ignored her. You've been a charity case since high school, Natalie. Dad felt sorry for you, that's all. So he threw you some notebooks to make himself feel better about playing favorites with the people who actually mattered. The words landed like physical blows. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, reaching for my coat. Mr. Hartwell stood as well, his voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Brooks, I must insist you refrain from this behavior. Your father's wishes are clear, and Miss Brooks has every right to her inheritance without harassment." Derek laughed again, that same brutal sound. "Inheritance. She got garbage while we got the empire." The attorney's jaw tightened. "Actually, Mr. Brooks, if you'll allow me to finish, there is one more provision." He pulled out a separate sealed envelope, this one marked with my father's handwriting. "Natalie Rose Brooks, private and confidential. Your father left specific instructions that this letter be read aloud only if there was dispute regarding Miss Brooks's inheritance." The room went silent. Even Vanessa put down her phone. Mr. Hartwell broke the seal and unfolded a single sheet of my father's letterhead. His voice was steady but carried weight. "If you are hearing this letter, it means my son has revealed the cruelty I always feared lived in his heart. To be clear, Natalie is not receiving less. She is receiving everything that matters. What I have given Derek and Patricia are material comforts. What I have given Natalie is the key to legacy that will outlive us all." My breath caught. Derek's face drained of color. The research journals contain 23 years of work on Project Meridian, a treatment for cellular regeneration that could revolutionize medicine. I have patented this work in Natalie's name, and she alone holds the rights to its development and distribution. The safety deposit box contains documentation proving that every dollar Derek believes he inherited from my company was built on the foundation of Natalie's mother's family money. The room exploded. Derek lunged forward, but Mr. Hartwell held up his hand sharply. "There's more. Elizabeth Chin, Natalie's biological mother, was my first wife. She died when Natalie was 3 years old, leaving her entire estate in trust for her daughter. Patricia, whom I married 2 years later, has been aware of this arrangement from the beginning. The trust has now matured, and Natalie Brooks is the sole heir to the Chin Medical Research Foundation, valued at $47 million. I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to tilt. My mother, Patricia, wasn't my mother. My father had been married before. I had a different mother, a mother I couldn't remember. Mr. Hartwell continued reading, his voice the only sound in the suffocating silence. Natalie, my darling girl, you were 3 years old when we lost your mother to the very disease I have spent my life trying to cure. She made me promise that you would finish her work. Everything I have done, every late night in the laboratory, every dollar I invested, was to ensure you had the tools to complete what she started. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears streaming down my face. Derek stood frozen, his earlier rage collapsed into shock. Patricia's mask had finally cracked, her face pale and drawn. Claire moved to my side, taking my hand. Patricia knew, my father's letter continued, that marrying me meant accepting that my first loyalty would always be to Elizabeth's memory and our daughter. She agreed to raise Natalie as her own, and for that I was grateful. But I was never blind to the favoritism she showed her biological children, nor to Derek's cruelty. That is why I have structured my estate this way. Derek, you have received properties and business assets, but they are built on land purchased with Elizabeth's family money. The moment you attempt to sell or leverage them without Natalie's written consent, ownership reverts to the Chin Foundation. Patricia, you have received comfort and security, but you do not have control. And Natalie, my brilliant, kind, overlooked daughter, you have received the truth and the power to transform it into healing. Mr. Hartwell set down the letter. There was a final line written in my father's shaking handwriting, added recently by the look of the ink. My dearest Natalie, do not let them diminish you. Your mother's legacy is waiting. Go to San Francisco. Dr. Helena Winters at the Golden Gate Medical Research Institute is expecting you. She knew your mother. She knows what you're meant to become. With all my love, Dad. The drive back to my apartment felt surreal, like I was moving through water. Rain hammered against the windshield, the wipers beating a rhythm that matched my racing heart. Claire had insisted on coming with me, and now she sat in the passenger seat, periodically reaching over to squeeze my hand. Behind us, we'd left chaos. Derek had started shouting about fraud and legal challenges before Mr. Hartwell calmly informed him that contesting the will would trigger an immediate investigation into how he'd been using Brooks' development funds. Patricia had simply walked out without a word, her silence somehow more devastating than Derek's rage. My apartment in the Pearl District was small, a studio I'd rented after finishing my doctorate because I couldn't stand living in the family house anymore. The walls were covered with research papers and molecular diagrams, my own work on cellular biology that suddenly felt connected to something much larger. Claire helped me make tea while I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the envelope Mr. Hartwell had given me before we left. Inside were keys to the safety deposit box, my father's research journals, and a photograph I'd never seen before. The woman in the picture was beautiful, with my same dark hair and the exact shape of my eyes. She wore a white lab coat and stood in front of a building with Chinese characters above the entrance. On the back, in my father's handwriting, it said Elizabeth Chin, Stanford Medical School, 1995. 3 months before Natalie was born. I traced her face with my finger, trying to find some memory, some buried recognition. Nothing came. I'd been 3 when she died. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Too young to remember her voice, her laugh, the way she held me. Claire sat down across from me, her own tea untouched. I can't believe Mom never told you. She's not my mom, I said quietly. The words felt strange, like trying on clothes that didn't fit. I mean, she raised you. That counts for something. Does it? I looked up at my sister, this girl who shared my father but not my mother, who'd grown up in the same house but in a completely different family. She never loved me the way she loved you and Derek. You know that. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I know. I've always known. I hated it. Derek was awful to you, and Mom just let it happen. Dad tried to protect you, but he was always working. I used to think he was avoiding us, but now I realize he was probably in his lab, working on this project, trying to keep his promise to your mom. I picked up the photograph again. Dr. Helena Winters. My father said she knew my mother. He said she's expecting me in San Francisco. Are you going to go? Claire asked. I have to. Don't I? This is what he wanted. This is what my mother wanted before I even knew she existed. The enormity of it crashed over me in waves. $47 million. A medical research foundation. Patents in my name. A treatment that could revolutionize medicine. 24 hours ago, I'd been the overlooked daughter, the one who got notebooks while everyone else got empires. Now I was the heir to something that made Derek's real estate holdings look like pocket change. That night, after Claire left, I opened my father's research journals. His handwriting filled page after page, dense technical notes mixed with personal observations. The entry started in 1998, the year after my mother died. Day 1 of Project Meridian, he'd written. Elizabeth, I will finish what you started. Our daughter will see your dream realized. I will make sure of it. The research focused on cellular regeneration, specifically targeting the kind of aggressive cancer that had killed my mother. He'd been trying to save her even after she was gone, trying to build a cure for a disease that had taken her too soon. As I read deeper into the journals, I began to see the brilliance of his work. He'd isolated specific proteins that could trigger regeneration in damaged cells, essentially teaching the body to heal itself at a molecular level. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about cancer. This was about organ failure, degenerative diseases, trauma recovery. This was about fundamentally changing how medicine approached healing. And he'd patented it all in my name. Why me? I whispered to the empty apartment. I was a researcher, yes. I had my PhD in cellular biology. But I was nobody important, just another scientist working on grant proposals and teaching undergraduate courses at Portland State. I wasn't ready to run a $47 million foundation. I wasn't ready to carry my mother's legacy. Except my father had thought I was. He'd spent 23 years preparing for this moment, building something that only I could inherit. The next morning, I called in sick to the university and drove to Columbia Trust Bank. The safety deposit box was in a private viewing room, the kind with thick carpet and walls that muffled sound. The bank manager, a trim woman named Mrs. Foster, personally escorted me down. "Your father was very specific about the protocols for this box," she said, checking my identification 3 times. "Only you can access it, and only with the keys and the password he provided." "What password?" I asked. She consulted her computer. "He said you would know. It's something your mother used to say." My mind raced through fragments of stories my father had told me, rare moments when he'd spoken about Elizabeth. Then it came to me, a phrase I'd always thought was his own invention but now realized had come from her. "Healing is hope made visible," I said. Mrs. Foster smiled. "That's correct." The safety deposit box was larger than I expected, almost a small trunk. Inside were stacks of legal documents, bound journals, and 3 sealed manila envelopes marked with dates. The first envelope was labeled to be opened immediately. The second said open after meeting Dr. Winters. The third said open when you're ready to choose. I took the first envelope to the viewing table, my hands shaking slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter in my father's handwriting, along with a plane ticket to San Francisco and a business card for Dr. Helena Winters at the Golden Gate Medical Research Institute. The letter began simply. "My dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've finally learned the truth. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. Patricia made me promise not to reveal your true parentage until after my death. She was afraid of what it would mean for Derek and Claire, afraid of dividing the family even more than it already was. But you deserve to know who you are and where you come from. Your mother, Elizabeth Chen, was the most brilliant person I ever met. She came from a family of physicians in San Francisco, generations of healers who believed medicine was a sacred calling. When she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 32, just after you were born, she refused to let it destroy her spirit. She spent her final year documenting her research, setting up the foundation, and making me promise that you would finish her work. You have her mind, Natalie. You have her heart. You have her stubborn refusal to accept that some diseases are simply incurable. Dr. Helena Winters was your mother's mentor and closest friend. She has been waiting for you for 23 years. The foundation has been dormant, managed by trustees who kept it alive but never activated it. That was your mother's wish. She wanted you to be old enough to understand what you were inheriting, experienced enough to handle the responsibility, and strong enough to withstand the pressure that will come when people realize what Project Meridian can do. The plane ticket is for tomorrow. Don't delay, my darling. Your destiny is waiting, and the world needs what you're about to become. I sat in that quiet room for a long time, holding my father's letter and my mother's photograph. Outside, Portland continued its gray November existence, people rushing through rain to meetings and appointments that suddenly seemed impossibly small. My phone buzzed with increasingly angry texts from Derek, legal threats mixed with personal attacks. Patricia had called twice, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What do you say to a woman who raised you but never loved you, who knew your entire life was built on a secret she'd agreed to keep? That evening, I packed a single suitcase. Claire came over to drive me to the airport in the morning, bringing takeout Chinese food and a fierce hug. "You're going to be amazing," she said. "Mom and Derek are terrified, you know. They finally realized Dad didn't actually leave them the empire. He left them the illusion of one." I picked at my Kung Pao chicken. "I don't want to destroy them, Claire. I just want to understand what I'm supposed to do with all this." "Then go find out," she said simply. "Go meet this Dr. Winters. Learn about your real mom. Figure out what Project Meridian actually means. And then, when you're ready, come back and show Derek exactly what inheritance really looks like." We stayed up late, talking about memories of Dad, about the times he'd taken me to his laboratory and let me look through microscopes while Derek was at soccer practice. I'd thought he was just keeping me occupied, giving me something to do so I wouldn't feel left out. Now I realized he'd been training me, preparing me, showing me the world I'd been born to enter. The flight to San Francisco left at 6 in the morning. Claire drove through pre-dawn darkness, the city still sleeping under its blanket of rain. At the airport, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Call me when you land. Call me after you meet Dr. Winters. Call me whenever you need to remember that not everyone in this family is terrible." I promised I would. As I walked through security, I felt the weight of my father's journals in my carry-on bag, the photograph of my mother tucked into my wallet. I was walking away from everything I'd known, toward a truth I couldn't yet comprehend. The plane lifted through the clouds, and Portland disappeared below. I pressed my forehead against the cold window and whispered the words my mother used to say, the words that had unlocked everything. Healing is hope made visible. Somewhere ahead, in a city I barely knew, a woman who'd loved my mother was waiting to show me how to make that hope real. My father had left me more than an inheritance. He'd left me a mission. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the overlooked daughter standing in the shadows. I was Elizabeth Chen's child, carrying her legacy forward into light. The plane banked south, chasing the morning sun, and I felt something shift inside me. Not confidence exactly, but something quieter and more powerful. Purpose. My name was Natalie Rose Brooks, and my real life was just beginning. San Francisco greeted me with fog so thick it felt like walking through someone else's dream. The taxi from the airport wound through streets I'd only seen in postcards, past Victorian houses painted in colors that seemed too bright for the muted light. The Golden Gate Medical Research Institute sat in Pacific Heights, a historic building that looked more like a mansion than a research facility. Ivy climbed its brick walls, and tall windows reflected the gray sky like mirrors into another world. I paid the driver with trembling hands and stood on the sidewalk, my suitcase beside me, staring up at the brass plaque beside the entrance. Established 1972 by Drive Robert Chen and Dr. Helena Winters. Chen. My mother's family name. This wasn't just a research institute. This was part of my history, a piece of my identity I'd never known existed. The lobby smelled like old books and something floral, jasmine maybe. A reception desk stood empty, but before I could figure out where to go, a door opened to my right and a woman emerged. She was in her early 70s, I guessed, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp intelligent eyes behind frameless glasses. She wore a white lab coat over elegant slacks, and when she saw me, she stopped so abruptly that her hand flew to her chest. "Elizabeth," she whispered. Then she blinked, shook her head slightly, and her professional composure returned. "You must be Natalie. I'm Dr. Helena Winters. Your father called me 2 weeks before he passed. He said it was finally time." I stood frozen, unable to find words. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between joy and grief. "You look exactly like her," she said softly. "Same eyes, same way of standing like you're ready to either run or fight. Elizabeth had that quality too. Please, come with me. We have so much to discuss." Her office was on the 3rd floor, a space that managed to be both professional and deeply personal. Medical journals lined the shelves alongside photographs of researchers in various laboratories. But what caught my attention was the wall dedicated entirely to my mother. Pictures of her at different ages, in different settings, always with that same focused intelligence in her eyes. Elizabeth at Stanford. Elizabeth receiving her medical degree. Elizabeth in a laboratory, bent over a microscope, completely absorbed in her work. And in the center, a portrait of her holding a baby. Holding me. That was taken 2 months before her diagnosis, Dr. Winters said quietly, standing beside me. She'd just returned from maternity leave, excited to restart her research. She had no idea she was already sick. The cancer was aggressive, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already spread too far to stop. I couldn't look away from the photograph. My mother's face was radiant, full of hope and fierce protection. I was reaching up toward her face with tiny hands, and she was smiling at me like I was the most important discovery she'd ever made. "How long did she have after the diagnosis?" I asked, my voice barely audible. 11 months, Dr. Winters replied. 11 months of treatment, research, and preparation. She refused to waste a single day on despair. Instead, she documented everything, organized her research, set up the foundation structure, and made your father promise that you would be the one to finish what she'd started. She believed that her daughter would have the same calling, the same drive to heal that had defined her entire life. What if I don't? I turned to face her, panic rising in my chest. What if I can't live up to what she wanted? What if I'm not brilliant enough or strong enough or whatever it takes to run a $47 million foundation and complete revolutionary medical research? Dr. Winters smiled gently. Elizabeth asked me the same question when she was diagnosed. What if I can't beat this? What if I'm not strong enough? I told her then what I'm telling you now. Strength isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing it anyway. She sat down behind her desk and gestured for me to take the chair across from her. Your mother didn't know if her research would work. She didn't know if you would choose medicine. She didn't know anything except that she had to try, had to leave you something more than grief. I sank into the chair, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming me. My father's journals mention Project Meridian, but I don't fully understand what it is. He wrote about cellular regeneration and targeted proteins, but the technical details are beyond my current expertise. That's because he simplified it for documentation purposes, Dr. Winters said. The actual research is far more complex. Your mother discovered a way to trigger dormant regenerative capabilities in human cells, essentially teaching damaged tissue to repair itself at a fundamental level. The applications are enormous. Cancer treatment, organ failure, degenerative diseases, traumatic injuries. If Project Meridian works the way Elizabeth believed it would, we're looking at a paradigm shift in how medicine approaches healing. She pulled out a tablet and brought up a series of molecular diagrams. This is where your mother was when she died. She'd identified the key proteins and mapped the cellular pathways. What she didn't have time to do was test it, refine it, prove it actually works in human trials. That's what the foundation was designed to do. That's what she wanted you to complete. I studied the diagrams, my training in cellular biology finally clicking into place. This is incredible. If these pathways are accurate, if the proteins can actually trigger this kind of regeneration without causing mutation or uncontrolled growth, this could save millions of lives. Exactly, Dr. Winters said. But it also represents billions of dollars in potential pharmaceutical applications. Which means the moment we publish this research, the moment we prove it works, every major pharmaceutical company on the planet will try to acquire it, suppress it, or steal it. Your mother knew that. That's why she set up the foundation structure the way she did. You own the patents. You control the research. You decide how it gets used and who benefits from it. The weight of it pressed down on me like a physical force. I'm 27 years old. I teach introductory biology to undergraduates. How am I supposed to navigate pharmaceutical politics and protect research that could change the world? Dr. Winters leaned forward, her gaze intense. You're Elizabeth Chen's daughter. You have her intellect, her training, and most importantly, you have her heart. She didn't want Project Meridian to become a commodity. She wanted it to be healing accessible to everyone who needs it, not just those who can afford it. That's why she chose you, Natalie. Not because you're experienced or connected or powerful, but because you understand what it means to be overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. You won't forget the people who need this most. We spent the next 3 hours going through my mother's research files. Dr. Winters had preserved everything. Not just the scientific work but personal notes Elizabeth had written as her illness progressed. In those notes, I found my mother's voice for the first time. She wrote about her fears and hopes, about loving me and your father, about the desperate race to finish her work before time ran out. One entry, dated 3 weeks before she died, hit me with particular force. Natalie is sleeping in her crib beside my hospital bed. Charles brought her so I could see her one more time. She doesn't understand why mommy is always tired, why I can't hold her the way I used to. But she smiles at me anyway, reaches for me with those tiny perfect hands. I'm writing this for her, for the woman she'll become. Someday she'll read these words and know that every moment I spent on this research, every hour away from her that I can never get back, was because I loved her too much to leave her a world where diseases like mine go undefeated. If she chooses medicine, if she picks up this work, I want her to know it's not a burden. It's a gift. The gift of purpose, of knowing your life matters beyond yourself. I had to stop reading, tears blurring the words. Dr. Winters quietly handed me a tissue. She loved you fiercely, Natalie. Everything she did was for you. I wiped my eyes, trying to compose myself. How did you and my mother meet? Medical school at Stanford, Dr. Winters said, a smile softening her features. We were both in the same research track, both obsessed with cellular biology. Elizabeth was brilliant, but what made her special was her compassion. She never forgot that behind every cell sample, every data point, there was a human life. We opened this institute together after graduation, with funding from her family. The Chens have been physicians in San Francisco for 4 generations. Your great-grandfather was one of the first Chinese-American doctors licensed in California. I had a heritage, a lineage of healers I'd never known existed. My entire life I'd thought I was just Charles Brooks's daughter, the one who didn't quite fit in the family. Now I discovered I was part of something much older and deeper. What happened to my mother's family after she died? I asked. Dr. Winters's expression grew sad. Your grandparents, Elizabeth's parents, both passed away within 2 years of her death. I think losing their only child broke something in them. Her brother, your Uncle Thomas, moved to Hong Kong for work. He sends money to maintain the foundation, but he couldn't bear to be involved directly. Too many memories. You're the last of the Chen medical line, Natalie. The last one who can carry their legacy forward. The responsibility felt crushing and exhilarating at the same time. What do I do now? I asked. Where do I even start? Dr. Winters pulled out a folder thick with documents. First, you need to officially take control of the Chen Medical Research Foundation. I've been serving as interim director, but legally, ownership transfers to you on your 27th birthday. That was last month, according to your father's timeline. Once you sign these papers, the foundation and all its assets become yours to direct. I stared at the papers, my father's careful planning evident in every clause. He'd structured everything to activate precisely when I'd be old enough to understand but young enough to have decades ahead to complete the work. What about Project Meridian? How far along is the research actually? We've continued Elizabeth's work, Dr. Winters said, bringing up more files on her tablet. In the 23 years since her death, we've refined the protein compounds, conducted extensive animal trials, and mapped every possible cellular pathway. What we haven't done is human trials. Those require FDA approval, massive funding, and a level of public scrutiny that we've deliberately avoided. Your mother wanted you to make that decision when you were ready. Why wait for me? If the research is ready, why not just move forward? Because, Dr. Winters said carefully, once we go public with human trials, Project Meridian becomes visible to the world. Every pharmaceutical company, every research institution, every government agency will want access to it. Some will offer partnerships. Others will try hostile acquisition. A few might even attempt industrial espionage. Elizabeth wanted you to be the one making those choices because she trusted you to prioritize healing over profit, people over patents. I thought about Derek back in Portland, his fury over an inheritance he'd thought was his birthright. I thought about Patricia's cold silence, her decades of pretending to be my mother while knowing the truth. They'd taught me exactly what happens when money matters more than people. My mother had been right to wait for me. Have there been any inquiries? Anyone asking questions about the foundation or the research? Dr. Winters hesitated. A few. Mostly academic curiosity from other researchers who knew your mother. But 3 months ago, we received a formal inquiry from Meridian Pharmaceuticals. They somehow found out about Project Meridian's existence and offered to buy the patents outright. When we refused, they increased their offer significantly. When we refused again, they went quiet. That makes me nervous. Why would it make you nervous if they accepted the refusal? Because companies like Meridian Pharmaceuticals don't accept refusal, Dr. Winters said grimly. They're one of the largest pharmaceutical corporations in the world, with annual revenues in the billions. If they want something badly enough, they find ways to get it. Legal ways, usually, but not always ethical ones. A chill ran through me. You think they'd try to steal the research? I think they'd try to acquire it by whatever means necessary. That's why your father's timing was so precise. He waited until you had your doctorate, until you had enough training to understand the science and enough maturity to handle the pressure. He knew that once you took control of the foundation, you'd become a target. But he also knew you'd be ready. I wasn't sure I agreed with his assessment, but I understood his logic. The research was too valuable, too revolutionary to remain hidden forever. Eventually, someone would come looking for it. Better that I control it when they did. I'll sign the papers, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. I'll take control of the foundation. But I need to understand everything first. Every aspect of the research, every potential application, every risk and complication. I won't make decisions about human trials until I know exactly what we're dealing with. Dr. Winters smiled with approval. Elizabeth would be proud. Very well, starting tomorrow, you'll begin intensive training. I'll walk you through every stage of the research, introduce you to our team, and show you exactly what your mother built. It won't be easy, Natalie. You'll be working 12-hour days, absorbing 23 years of accumulated knowledge, and making decisions that will affect millions of lives. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my small apartment in Portland, my comfortable teaching job, the safe, predictable life I'd been living. Then I thought about my mother, spending her final months racing against death to leave me something meaningful. I thought about my father, working in secret for 2 decades to fulfill a promise to a woman he'd loved and lost. I thought about all the people suffering from diseases that Project Meridian might cure, waiting for someone brave enough to finish what Elizabeth Chen had started. No, I said honestly. I'm not prepared. But I'm going to do it anyway. Dr. Winters stood and extended her hand. Welcome home, Natalie. Welcome to your legacy. I shook her hand, feeling the calluses of a lifetime spent in laboratories, and understood that I was crossing a threshold I could never uncross. Behind me was Natalie Brooks, the overlooked daughter, the one who got notebooks while others got empires. Ahead of me was someone I didn't quite know yet, someone who carried Elizabeth Chen's dream forward into an uncertain future. That evening, Dr. Winters arranged for me to stay in the Institute's residential wing, a suite that had apparently been prepared years ago in anticipation of my arrival. The rooms were simple but comfortable, with large windows overlooking the city. On the desk, I found a letter in an envelope marked with my mother's handwriting. To my daughter, when she finally comes home. My hands shook as I opened it. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. My dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, you found your way to Helena and the Institute. You've learned the truth about who you are and where you come from. I wish I could be there to see the woman you've become, but since I cannot, I'm leaving you these words instead. Being a physician, being a healer, is not about prestige or recognition. It's about standing in the gap between suffering and hope, using everything you know to bridge that distance. Some days you'll succeed gloriously. Other days you'll fail despite your best efforts. Both will change you. Both will teach you. Both matter equally. I don't know if you'll choose to continue my work. I hope you will, but I want you to know that my love for you is not conditional on that choice. You are my daughter, my greatest achievement, my deepest love. Whatever path you choose, walk it with courage and compassion. Those are the only inheritances that truly matter. Project Meridian was my attempt to transform my own tragedy into triumph for others. If you decide to finish it, know that you're not just completing my research. You're declaring that no disease, no suffering, no loss is ever wasted if it leads to healing for someone else. That's the real legacy I want to leave you. Not scientific breakthroughs or medical innovations, but the understanding that love persists even through death, transforming into work that outlives us all. Be brave, my darling girl. Be kind. Be brilliant. But most of all, be yourself. That will always be enough. All my love, across all the years I couldn't be with you. Mom. I read the letter 3 times, memorizing every word, every loop of her handwriting. Then I carefully folded it and placed it in my wallet next to her photograph. Outside, San Francisco's lights began to glow against the deepening dusk. Somewhere in this city, pharmaceutical executives were making plans. Somewhere, patients were suffering from diseases that Project Meridian might cure. Somewhere, my brother Derek was probably still fuming over an inheritance that had never been his to claim. But in that quiet room, with my mother's words echoing in my mind and my father's journal stacked on the desk beside me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt found. Not lost, not overlooked, not dismissed. Found. I was Elizabeth Chen's daughter, carrying her legacy forward. I was Charles Brooks's child, honoring his promise. And I was myself, Natalie Rose Brooks, stepping into a purpose I'd been born to fulfill. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Tomorrow I would start learning how to save lives with my mother's research. Tomorrow I would become the person my parents had believed I could be. But tonight, I simply sat by the window and watched the fog roll in from the ocean, wrapping the city in mystery and possibility. My inheritance wasn't money or property or power. It was something far more precious. It was hope made visible, waiting for me to bring it into the world. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of laboratory work, legal documents, and discoveries that rewired everything I thought I knew about medicine. Dr. Winters had not been exaggerating about the intensity of the training. Every morning began at 7 with rounds through the research facilities, meeting the team of scientists who had been quietly advancing Project Meridian for over 2 decades. There was Dr. Marcus Webb, a biochemist who specialized in protein synthesis. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, whose expertise in cellular regeneration had been instrumental in refining my mother's original formulas. And Gregory Palmer, not a scientist but the Foundation's legal counsel, a sharp-minded attorney who had protected Elizabeth Chen's patents through countless challenges and inquiries. They all knew my mother. They all remembered her with a reverence that made me feel both honored and inadequate. Dr. Webb told me about the time Elizabeth had worked 72 hours straight to crack a particular protein sequence, refusing to leave the lab until she understood why the cells were behaving unexpectedly. Dr. Tanaka showed me notebooks filled with my mother's handwriting, observations so detailed and precise they read like poetry. And Gregory shared stories of how Elizabeth had insisted that every patent be structured to prevent monopolization, building legal safeguards to ensure Project Meridian could never be locked away by corporate interests. The research itself was breathtaking in its complexity and elegance. My mother had identified a specific cascade of cellular signals that, when triggered correctly, could activate dormant regenerative pathways in adult human cells. Normally, those pathways shut down after childhood, which is why adults heal more slowly than children and why damaged organs rarely repair themselves fully. But Elizabeth had found a way to reawaken that capacity, essentially giving adult cells access to their own embryonic healing potential without causing the uncontrolled growth that leads to cancer. The key was precision. Too much activation and cells would multiply chaotically. Too little and nothing would happen. My mother had spent years mapping the exact protein concentrations, the specific timing sequences, the cellular environments that would allow controlled regeneration. The animal trials had been remarkably successful. Mice with induced organ damage had shown complete recovery. Primates with traumatic injuries had healed in half the expected time with no adverse effects. The science was sound. What remained was proving it worked in humans. But human trials meant FDA approval, clinical testing protocols, peer review, and public disclosure. The moment we filed for approval, Project Meridian would become public knowledge. That reality hung over everything like a coming storm. Dr. Winters had been monitoring inquiries about the Foundation, and the activity had increased notably since I'd arrived. 3 different pharmaceutical companies had sent representatives requesting meetings. 2 academic institutions had offered research partnerships. And Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the company that had gone quiet after their acquisition attempt, had begun making discreet inquiries about my background, my qualifications, my vulnerabilities. Gregory Palmer brought me the intelligence report one foggy afternoon in late December. We were in the Foundation's legal library, surrounded by filing cabinets containing decades of patent documentation. He spread photographs and documents across the table with the careful precision of someone delivering bad news. Meridian Pharmaceuticals has hired a private investigation firm to build a profile on you, he said without preamble. They're looking for leverage. Financial problems, personal scandals, anything they could use to pressure you into selling or partnering with them. I stared at the documents, my stomach tightening. What have they found? Not much, Gregory admitted. You've lived a remarkably clean life. No debt, no legal troubles, no controversial relationships. But they've been making inquiries in Portland, talking to people who know your family. And that's where things get interesting. He pulled out a folder marked Brooks Family Financial Review. Your brother Derek has significant financial problems. His real estate development company took on too much debt during the expansion, and several projects have stalled. He's facing potential bankruptcy within 6 months unless he can secure substantial capital. The properties your father left him are leveraged to the point of worthlessness. A cold realization settled over me. They're going to approach Derek. They're going to offer him money in exchange for information about me or the Foundation. Gregory nodded grimly. Or worse, they might suggest he has legal grounds to challenge your inheritance. If they can tie up the Foundation in probate litigation, they can delay human trials indefinitely. By the time the legal mess is sorted out, they'll have had years to develop their own competing research. Can they actually challenge my inheritance? I asked. My father's will was explicit. Everything was legally structured. Gregory leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Legally, no. Your father's will is airtight, and the Foundation was established by your mother years before she died. But they don't need to win a legal challenge. They just need to create enough chaos and uncertainty to make you desperate for a settlement. They'll drag your family through public court battles, expose every private detail of your father's marriages, question your legitimacy as heir. The goal is to make fighting them so painful that selling to Meridian looks like the easier option. I felt anger rising, hot and sharp. My mother created this research to heal people, not to be used as a bargaining chip in corporate warfare. She wanted it accessible to everyone who needs it, not locked behind pharmaceutical patents and profit margins. I won't let them turn her legacy into just another product. Then you need to move quickly, Gregory said. File for FDA approval immediately. Once we're in the official clinical trial process, it becomes much harder for them to interfere. The research will be publicly documented, peer-reviewed, and protected under federal regulations. They can still try to acquire it, but they can't bury it or suppress it. Dr. Winters had been standing in the doorway, listening. She entered now, her face serious. Gregory is right, but you need to understand what you're committing to. FDA approval for a treatment this revolutionary will take years. You'll be subject to intense scrutiny from the medical community, the media, and competitors. Every aspect of your life will be examined. Every decision you make will be questioned. And if anything goes wrong during trials, if there are unexpected side effects or complications, you'll be held responsible. I looked between them, these people who had protected my mother's work for over 2 decades, who were now asking me to step into the firing line. What would my mother do? I asked quietly. Dr. Winters smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in days. Elizabeth would file the paperwork immediately, then work around the clock to make sure the trial succeeded. She never let fear of failure stop her from trying. So that's what we're going to do. The FDA application took 3 weeks to complete. Every detail of Project Meridian had to be documented, every animal trial result compiled, every safety protocol outlined. I worked with Dr. Webb and Dr. Tanaka to prepare the scientific submissions while Gregory handled the legal requirements. We filed the application on January 15th, a cold Tuesday morning when San Francisco was wrapped in its thickest fog of the winter. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours, the medical community was buzzing with speculation about the mysterious Chin Foundation and its revolutionary regenerative treatment. News outlets picked up the story, running headlines about a potential breakthrough that could change medicine forever. My phone exploded with interview requests, partnership proposals, and congratulatory messages from researchers I'd never met. But along with the excitement came the attacks. Skeptical scientists questioned whether the research could possibly be legitimate. Bioethicists raised concerns about the implications of cellular regeneration technology. And Meridian Pharmaceuticals released a carefully worded statement expressing doubt about the Foundation's ability to conduct proper clinical trials, suggesting that such important research should be handled by established pharmaceutical companies with proven track records. The media picked up on that angle, running stories that questioned my qualifications. 27-year-old takes control of Foundation. Is she experienced enough to handle revolutionary medical research? They dug into my background, my teaching position at Portland State, my relatively modest publication record. They interviewed colleagues who said I was competent but unremarkable, hardly the visionary leader needed for a project of this magnitude. The criticism stung, but I forced myself to stay focused on the work. Dr. Winters reminded me daily that my mother had faced similar skepticism when she first proposed her theories about cellular regeneration. The medical establishment resists change, she said. They always have. Your job isn't to convince everyone. It's to prove the science works. Then Derek called. It was late evening, and I was in the laboratory reviewing trial protocols when my phone lit up with his name. I considered ignoring it, but something made me answer. What do you want, Derek? His voice came through tight and controlled. We need to talk about the Foundation. About what Dad really intended when he set up his will. Dad's intentions were crystal clear, I said. He wanted me to continue Mom's research. My biological mother, in case you've forgotten. There was a pause, and I could almost hear him recalibrating his approach. Look, Natalie, I know we haven't always gotten along, but we're still family. And I'm concerned that you're in over your head with this whole medical research thing. You're a teacher, not a pharmaceutical executive. Maybe it would be better if you had some experienced partners to help guide the Foundation. Let me guess, I said coldly. Meridian Pharmaceuticals approached you. They offered you money to convince me to sell. Derek's silence confirmed everything. How much did they offer you? I pressed. How much is my mother's legacy worth to you? It's not about the money, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's about being realistic. You can't possibly manage a foundation this size on your own. Meridian has the resources, the expertise, the infrastructure to actually bring this treatment to market. They're offering a partnership that would benefit everyone. Everyone except the patients who can't afford their prices, I shot back. Meridian is one of the most expensive pharmaceutical companies in the world. They'd turn Project Meridian into another luxury treatment available only to the wealthy. That's the opposite of what my mother wanted. Your mother, Derek said, and I heard the old bitterness creeping into his voice. You mean the woman who died when you were 3? The woman you don't even remember? You're building your entire identity around someone you never actually knew. The words were designed to hurt, and they succeeded. But they also clarified something for me. I don't need to remember her to honor her, I said quietly. I have her research. I have her words. I have her vision for what medicine should be. That's enough. And Derek, if Meridian or anyone else approaches you again, you can tell them I'm not interested in partnerships, buyouts, or anything else that compromises what she built. You're making a mistake, he said. You're going to fail, and when you do, don't expect the family to bail you out. I've already failed in your eyes, I reminded him. You made that clear at the will reading when you told me I wasn't family. So I guess I have nothing left to lose. I hung up before he could respond. Dr. Winters found me an hour later, still sitting in the dark laboratory. She didn't ask what was wrong, just handed me a cup of tea and sat down beside me. Your mother had a brother, she said after a moment. Thomas. He was 10 years older than Elizabeth, and when she died, he completely fell apart. Blamed himself for not being able to save her, even though he was a cardiologist and her cancer was completely outside his specialty. I'd wondered about my uncle, about why he'd stayed so distant from the foundation. What happened to him? He moved to Hong Kong and threw himself into his work, Dr. Winters said. Hasn't been back to San Francisco in 20 years. But he's been funding the foundation this entire time, sending money to keep it operational until you were ready to take over. He couldn't bear to be involved directly, but he never forgot his sister's dream. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because, Dr. Winters said gently, grief and love can coexist. Thomas loved Elizabeth so much that he had to leave everything associated with her behind just to survive. Derek and Claire are your half-siblings, but they're still your siblings. They grew up in the shadow of your mother's memory, always knowing their father had loved someone else first. That doesn't excuse Derek's behavior, but it might explain it. I thought about that, about growing up with a father whose loyalty belonged to a dead woman and a daughter who carried her legacy. Patricia had agreed to raise me, but she'd never been able to love me. Derek and Claire had been given a mother's love while I'd been given something else entirely, an inheritance of purpose that had skipped them completely. No wonder Derek was angry. No wonder he'd spent his life trying to prove himself worthy of attention that would never fully turn his way. But understanding him didn't mean accepting his betrayal. I can't let empathy compromise the work, I said. If Derek is working with Meridian, he's actively trying to destroy what my mother built. Dr. Winters nodded. I know. I just wanted you to understand that this fight is going to hurt in ways that have nothing to do with science or business. It's going to cut into family, into identity, into every complicated relationship you've ever had. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my mother's letter, about her words regarding love persisting through death and transforming into work that outlives us all. I'm prepared to try, I said. That's all anyone can do. The FDA approval process moved forward with agonizing slowness. Every submission required mountains of documentation. Every question from regulators spawned 10 more. We had to prove not just that Project Meridian was safe, but that our team had the expertise to conduct proper clinical trials, that our facilities met federal standards, that our protocols addressed every possible complication. Meanwhile, the pressure from Meridian Pharmaceuticals intensified. They launched a media campaign highlighting the risks of unproven treatments, subtly suggesting that small foundations lacked the resources for proper safety oversight. They funded studies by skeptical researchers who questioned the theoretical basis of cellular regeneration therapy. And they continued approaching potential allies, offering funding and partnerships to anyone who might influence my decision. But they also made a mistake. In their eagerness to acquire Project Meridian, they overplayed their hand. Gregory Palmer discovered that Meridian had been attempting to patent similar regenerative treatments based on research that bore suspicious similarities to my mother's work. It wasn't quite theft, the science was different enough to avoid direct plagiarism, but it was close enough to suggest they'd had access to information that should have been confidential. We have them, Gregory said, spreading the evidence across the conference table. They've been using illegally obtained information to develop competing research. If we can prove it, we can not only block their patents but potentially bring charges for industrial espionage. How do we prove they obtained the information illegally? I asked. We'd need to trace how they got access to your mother's original research notes, Gregory said. The only people who have had that access are members of this foundation and the trustees who managed it before you took over. Which meant someone close to the foundation had leaked information to Meridian. Someone we trusted had betrayed my mother's legacy for money or pressure or reasons I couldn't yet understand. Dr. Winters looked stricken. I've personally vetted everyone on our research team. They've all been with us for years, some since Elizabeth was alive. I can't believe any of them would do this. People do surprising things when enough money is involved, Gregory said grimly. Meridian has essentially unlimited resources. They could have offered amounts that made betrayal irresistible. We spent the next week quietly investigating, reviewing access logs, checking communications records, looking for any evidence of contact between our team and Meridian representatives. The answer, when it came, was unexpected and devastating. The leak hadn't come from our research team. It had come from one of the foundation's original trustees, a man named Howard Sterling who had managed the Chin family's financial affairs for 40 years. Gregory found the evidence buried in old email archives. Sterling had been contacted by Meridian 2 years ago, long before I'd taken control of the foundation. They'd offered him a consulting fee in exchange for general information about the foundation's research direction. Nothing classified, nothing explicitly illegal, just background details that would help Meridian understand the competitive landscape. Sterling had rationalized it as harmless, a way to supplement his retirement income by sharing information that would become public eventually anyway. But those background details had included enough specifics about my mother's approach to cellular regeneration that Meridian's researchers could reverse engineer the theoretical framework. They couldn't replicate the exact protocols without access to the detailed research notes, but they could develop parallel research that would allow them to claim independent discovery. The betrayal hit harder than I expected. Howard Sterling had been at my mother's funeral. He'd helped my father set up the legal structures that protected the foundation. And he'd sold pieces of her legacy for consulting fees that probably seemed insignificant compared to the foundation's overall value. What do we do now? I asked Gregory. We confront him, demand he cease all contact with Meridian, and threaten legal action if he's leaked any additional information. We also use this as leverage. Meridian knows they've built their competing research on shaky ethical ground. If we threaten to expose Sterling's cooperation, they'll have to back down or risk their own patents being invalidated. It felt like playing a game where the rules kept changing and the stakes kept rising. But I was learning, slowly and painfully, that protecting my mother's legacy meant more than just good science. It meant understanding power, leverage, and the uncomfortable reality that people would always try to profit from innovation that should belong to everyone. The confrontation with Howard Sterling happened in Gregory's office on a rainy February afternoon. Sterling arrived looking nervous, his retirement tan faded to a sickly pallor. He knew why he'd been summoned. "Miss Brooks," he began, but I held up my hand. "My mother trusted you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My father trusted you. You managed our family's financial affairs for 4 decades, and you sold information about my mother's research to a pharmaceutical company." Sterling's face crumbled. It wasn't supposed to matter. The information was so general, so vague. They were going to find out anyway once you filed for FDA approval. I needed the money. Medical bills for my wife, expenses I hadn't planned for. I understood financial desperation. I even understood the rationalization that made betrayal seem acceptable. But I couldn't forgive the impact. Because of what you did, Meridian has been able to develop competing research. They're trying to patent treatments based on my mother's theoretical framework. If they succeed, they could block Project Meridian from ever reaching patients. Your need for money might cost lives. Sterling looked at me with genuine anguish. I never meant for that to happen. You have to believe me. I thought I was just answering harmless questions. What do I believe doesn't matter, I said. What matters is what you do now. You're going to sign a declaration detailing every piece of information you shared with Meridian. You're going to testify if we need you to challenge their patents. And you're going to resign from any remaining role with the foundation. In exchange, we won't press criminal charges. He signed the documents with shaking hands, decades of dignified service ending in shame and regret. As he left, Gregory turned to me with approval. That was harder than any scientific protocol, he said. Making that call, holding someone accountable while understanding their desperation. Your mother would be proud. But I didn't feel proud. I felt exhausted, old beyond my 27 years, burdened by decisions that affected more than just myself. This was what my mother had known would come, the moment when protecting her legacy required hardness, judgment, consequences. She'd prepared me by giving me the research, the resources, and the legal protections. But she couldn't prepare me for how it would feel to become someone who had to make these choices. That night, I called Claire. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm and concerned. "How are you holding up?" "I'm tired," I admitted. "I'm learning that inheriting something meaningful is nothing like inheriting something valuable." Claire was quiet for a moment. Derek called me yesterday. He's really struggling, Nat. The business is failing, and I think he's starting to understand what Dad was trying to teach him. What's that? I asked. That money without purpose is just numbers in an account. Derek has properties and assets, but they're all built on debt and ego. You have something real, something that matters beyond yourself. He's finally realizing which inheritance was actually worth something. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it all. I miss Dad. I miss having someone who understood what this meant. He's still with you, Claire said gently. In every protocol, every decision, every moment you choose to keep going. That's what inheritance really is. Not things, but the courage to carry forward what someone else started. We talked until midnight, about family and legacy and the unexpected ways love persists across time. When I finally hung up, I felt less alone. The work continued, exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. And somewhere in the fog-wrapped city, my mother's dream moved closer to reality with every passing day. Spring arrived in San Francisco with unexpected warmth, the fog retreating earlier each morning to reveal a city bathed in golden light. The cherry blossoms in Japantown bloomed in clouds of pink and white, and for the first time since arriving, I felt something other than constant pressure. The FDA had granted preliminary approval for Phase 1 clinical trials of Project Meridian, a milestone that had taken 3 months of relentless work and documentation. We would begin testing on 20 volunteer patients with degenerative liver disease, a condition where conventional medicine offered limited hope beyond transplantation. The trial design was elegant in its simplicity. Patients would receive carefully calibrated doses of the regenerative protein compound, monitored continuously for cellular response, adverse reactions, and functional improvement. Dr. Tanaka had refined the delivery mechanism to ensure precise targeting of damaged hepatic tissue while avoiding healthy cells. Every safety protocol had been reviewed, revised, and approved by 3 independent ethics boards. We were as prepared as science and caution could make us. But preparation didn't ease the anxiety that kept me awake at night. These would be real people, not laboratory animals, entrusting their health to a treatment that existed more in theoretical promise than proven results. I thought constantly about what could go wrong, about the responsibility I carried for every patient who volunteered. My mother had died before seeing her research tested in humans. Now I would witness what she could only imagine, and the weight of that felt almost unbearable. Isabel Romano, who had become my closest friend during these intense months, found me in the Institute's small garden one evening in late March. She was a research coordinator who specialized in patient care, someone whose warmth balanced the clinical detachment necessary for scientific work. She sat down beside me on the stone bench, offering me one of 2 coffee cups she carried. "You're thinking about your mother again," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking about what she'd tell me right now if she could," I admitted. "Whether she'd say I'm ready for this, or whether she'd tell me to wait longer, prepare more, make absolutely certain before we begin." Isabel sipped her coffee thoughtfully. From everything I've learned about Elizabeth Chin, she wasn't someone who waited for perfect certainty. She was someone who acted when the science was sound, even if the outcome was uncertain. That's what made her brilliant. What if something goes wrong? I asked, voicing the fear that haunted me. What if a patient has an unexpected reaction? What if the treatment causes harm instead of healing? Then we'll stop, Isabel said simply. We'll document what happened, learn from it, and adjust. That's what clinical trials are designed to do. Science isn't about avoiding all risk. It's about managing risk responsibly while pursuing treatments that could help millions. She was right, of course. But intellectual understanding didn't quiet the emotional turbulence. These weren't abstract millions. They were 20 specific individuals who would arrive next week, hoping that my mother's research could give them back years they'd thought were lost. The following Monday, I met the first patient scheduled for treatment. His name was Robert Chin, no relation to my mother despite the shared surname, a 58-year-old high school chemistry teacher whose liver was failing from a genetic condition that had killed his father at 60. He arrived at the institute with his wife Margaret, both of them radiating cautious hope tempered by years of disappointing medical consultations. "Dr. Brooks," Robert said, shaking my hand with surprising strength for someone so ill. "I've read everything I could find about your mother's research. What she discovered about cellular regeneration, it's revolutionary. Even if this trial doesn't work for me, the fact that someone is trying something new, something that might help my students' generation, that means everything." His words steadied me more than any amount of self-encouragement could have. This was why my mother had spent her final months racing against time. Not for personal glory or scientific acclaim, but for people like Robert who deserved a chance at more life. We began treatments the following day, starting with the lowest effective dose to minimize potential complications. The protocol required Robert to stay at the institute for 72 hours of intensive monitoring while the regenerative proteins worked through his system. Dr. Tanaka and I took shifts observing the cellular response through real-time imaging, watching as damaged hepatic tissue began responding to the treatment signals. The first 24 hours showed promising preliminary results. Robert's liver enzymes, which had been critically elevated, began stabilizing. Imaging revealed increased cellular activity in damaged regions, exactly what my mother's research had predicted. By hour 48, we were seeing measurable improvement in liver function, changes that would normally take months with conventional treatment if they occurred at all. Dr. Winters joined me in the observation room at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. "It's working," she whispered, staring at the data displays with tears in her eyes. Elizabeth's theory was correct. The regenerative pathways can be safely activated in adult human tissue. After all these years of animal trials and theoretical models, we're watching it happen in a human being. "We still have 18 more patients to treat," I reminded her, trying to maintain scientific caution despite my own excitement. "We need consistent results across the entire trial group before we can claim success." But yes, this is exactly what we hope to see. Robert's wife Margaret had stayed at the institute, sleeping in the family waiting room despite our encouragement to go home and rest. When I found her the next morning, she was reading one of the books Robert had brought, a worn copy of poetry by Pablo Neruda. "He teaches chemistry," she explained, "but his real passion has always been poetry. He wanted to live long enough to see our first grandchild born. Our daughter is pregnant, due in 5 months. He's going to make it," I said, meaning it with every fiber of certainty I possessed. "The treatment is working better than we expected." Margaret looked at me with an expression of such profound gratitude that I had to look away. "Thank you for finishing what your mother started. Thank you for not giving up on people like my husband who ran out of conventional options." Over the next 3 weeks, we treated all 20 patients in the Phase 1 trial. The results were remarkably consistent. 17 patients showed significant improvement in liver function. 2 showed moderate improvement. 1 patient, a woman with particularly advanced disease, showed minimal response, though she experienced no adverse effects. The safety profile was excellent, no serious complications, no unexpected reactions, no indication that the regenerative proteins were causing unintended cellular changes. The medical community's response was immediate and intense. News of the preliminary results leaked despite our attempts at confidentiality, and suddenly everyone wanted details. Research journals requested our data. Medical conferences invited me to present findings. Television news programs asked for interviews. And pharmaceutical companies, Meridian Pharmaceuticals most persistently, renewed their acquisition offers with even more aggressive terms. Gregory Palmer arranged a meeting with Meridian's representatives in early April. They sent 3 executives, led by a woman named Catherine Voss who radiated the polished confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. She sat across from me in the Foundation's conference room, her smile perfectly calibrated between friendly and professional. "Dr. Brooks," she began, "let me be direct. What you've accomplished with Project Meridian is extraordinary. Those Phase 1 results represent a genuine breakthrough in regenerative medicine. Meridian Pharmaceuticals would like to partner with you to bring this treatment to patients worldwide." "We're already bringing it to patients," I said calmly. "The Phase 1 trial is just the beginning. We'll move to Phase 2 trials later this year, and if those results continue to be positive, we'll seek full FDA approval for clinical use." Ms. Voss's smile didn't waver. "Of course, and that's admirable. But you must recognize that the Chin Foundation lacks the infrastructure for global distribution. Meridian has manufacturing facilities on 4 continents, relationships with regulatory agencies in 60 countries, and the capital to scale production immediately. We could have this treatment available to patients years faster than you could manage independently. At what cost? I asked. What would you charge patients for access to this treatment? That would depend on various factors, she said smoothly. Development costs, manufacturing expenses, market conditions. Our pricing models are designed to ensure treatments remain profitable enough to fund future research while being accessible to those who need them. Which is a polite way of saying you charge whatever the market will bear, I said. My mother specifically designed this foundation to prevent that outcome. She wanted healing accessible to everyone, not just those who can afford premium pharmaceuticals. Ms. Voss leaned forward slightly. Dr. Brooks, I understand you have idealistic goals, and that's commendable. But idealism doesn't manufacture drugs or navigate regulatory frameworks or manage international distribution networks. Meridian has the expertise and resources to bring Project Meridian to millions of patients. Without us, you'll spend years in bureaucratic processes while people continue suffering from treatable conditions. Her argument was seductive in its logic. I could imagine how many people would accept it, how many researchers would prioritize speed over principle. But I kept thinking about Robert Chin reading poetry in his hospital bed, about Margaret's gratitude, about all the patients who couldn't afford premium treatments and would be excluded if Meridian controlled distribution. My mother didn't spend her final months building this foundation so you could turn it into another profit center, I said. Project Meridian will remain under the Chin Foundation's control, and will establish our own manufacturing and distribution networks if necessary. Ms. Voss's pleasant expression finally cracked, revealing irritation beneath. You're making a strategic mistake. The pharmaceutical industry is complex and unforgiving. Independent foundations without corporate partnerships rarely succeed at scale. You'll face regulatory obstacles, manufacturing challenges, and competition from companies with far more resources than you possess. Then I guess we'll learn to compete, I said, standing to signal the meeting was over. Thank you for your interest, but the foundation isn't interested in partnerships that compromise our mission. After they left, Gregory turned to me with a mixture of admiration and concern. You just made a powerful enemy. Meridian doesn't accept rejection gracefully, and they have ways of making independence very difficult. Let them try, I said with more confidence than I felt. We have the science, the patents, and the legal protections. What can they actually do? Gregory's expression suggested I was being naive, but he didn't argue. We would all learn soon enough what Meridian could do when opposed. The answer came 2 weeks later in the form of a lawsuit. Meridian Pharmaceuticals filed a patent infringement claim, arguing that certain aspects of Project Meridian's regenerative protein compounds violated patents they held on cellular therapy mechanisms. The claim was absurd. Our research was entirely distinct and preceded their patents by decades, but it didn't need to be valid to be effective. The lawsuit would tie up the foundation in legal proceedings, delay Phase 2 trials, and create enough uncertainty to scare potential investors and partners. Gregory had predicted this, but knowing it was coming didn't make it less infuriating. They're using the legal system as a weapon, he explained, spreading the complaint documents across his desk. They know they'll lose eventually, but they can drag this out for months or years. In the meantime, you'll be spending resources on lawyers instead of research, answering interrogatories instead of treating patients. How do we fight this? I asked. We respond aggressively, Gregory said. We file counterclaims for their attempt to patent research derived from your mother's work. We make this expensive and embarrassing for them. And we go public with the whole story, let people see exactly what Meridian is trying to do. The publicity campaign was Isabel's idea. If Meridian wants to fight dirty, she said, then we show the world who they're fighting against. You're not some faceless corporation. You're a daughter honoring her mother's dying wish. You're a researcher trying to help patients who have no other options. That's a story people will care about. We scheduled a press conference for May 1st, 3 weeks after Meridian filed their lawsuit. The response from media was overwhelming. Every major news network wanted to cover it, along with dozens of medical journals, patient advocacy groups, and online health communities. The conference room at the institute was packed with reporters, cameras, and spectators when I walked to the podium. I'd prepared remarks with Isabel's help, but standing there facing all those expectant faces, I set aside my notes and spoke from the heart instead. "My name is Natalie Brooks," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. 6 months ago, I learned that my biological mother, Dr. Elizabeth Chin, spent the final year of her life developing a revolutionary treatment for cellular regeneration. She died before she could see it tested in humans. She died knowing she'd never hold her daughter again, never see me grow up, never know if her sacrifice meant anything. The room was absolutely silent. But she left me instructions. She left me research. She left me a foundation dedicated to healing, not profit. And she left me a choice. I could protect her legacy by keeping it small and safe, or I could risk everything by trying to bring her treatment to patients who need it. I chose to risk everything. I detailed the Phase 1 trial results, explaining in accessible terms how the regenerative proteins worked and what they could mean for millions of patients suffering from degenerative diseases. Then I addressed Meridian's lawsuit directly. A pharmaceutical company is now trying to stop this research through legal action. They claim we're infringing on patents they filed years after my mother's death. They're not trying to protect intellectual property. They're trying to acquire technology they couldn't develop themselves and control treatment they don't want anyone else to provide affordably. The reporters erupted with questions. "Are you saying Meridian stole your mother's research? Do you have proof of their intentions? What will happen to patients if the lawsuit succeeds?" I answered each question carefully, providing facts while avoiding claims I couldn't substantiate. Gregory had coached me thoroughly on staying within legal boundaries while still telling the truth. But the most important moment came when a reporter asked, "Why not just accept one of Meridian's partnership offers? Wouldn't that be easier than fighting them?" I looked directly at the camera, thinking about my mother's letter, about her belief that love persists through death by transforming into work that outlives us. "Because my mother didn't create this research to be easy," I said. "She created it to be right. She wanted healing accessible to everyone, not just those who can afford premium pharmaceuticals. I won't betray that vision just because honoring it is difficult." The press conference was broadcast nationally that evening. Social media exploded with support, patients and families sharing stories about being priced out of life-saving treatments, researchers discussing the importance of independent medical foundations, and advocates calling for pharmaceutical industry reform. Within 24 hours, Meridian Pharmaceuticals was facing their own public relations crisis as people demanded to know why they were trying to suppress promising research. But sympathy didn't change legal reality. The lawsuit proceeded, consuming time and resources exactly as Meridian intended. We spent weeks responding to discovery requests, sitting for depositions, preparing documents that had nothing to do with treating patients. The Phase 2 trials had to be delayed while we dealt with legal uncertainties. And despite the public support, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down harder each day. Then Derek called again. It was late June, and I was working in the laboratory when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, expecting another attempt to pressure me into selling. But something made me pick up. "Natalie," he said, his voice different than I'd ever heard it. Quieter, uncertain. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" I asked warily. "I've been talking to lawyers. Meridian's lawyers, specifically. They approached me months ago, offered me money to testify that Dad was mentally unstable when he wrote his will, that you manipulated him into leaving you the foundation. I almost did it. I needed the money so badly, and I was so angry that you got everything meaningful while I got properties built on debt." My stomach dropped. "Derek, what did you do?" "Nothing," he said quickly. "I mean, I met with them. I listened to their offer. But I couldn't go through with it. Because I kept thinking about something Dad said to me right before he died. He said the real tragedy wasn't that I didn't inherit his intelligence or his passion. It was that I'd inherited his capacity for self-deception." I didn't know what to say. Derek continued, his voice rough with emotion. He was right. I've spent my whole life pretending that money and properties and business success meant I was important. But watching you these past months, seeing you on television defending Elizabeth's research, I finally understood what Dad was trying to teach me. Legacy isn't what you own. It's what you build that outlasts you. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I want you to know that Meridian is getting desperate. Their lawsuit isn't going well, and they're looking for any leverage they can find. They might try to approach Claire next, or Patricia, or anyone who might have information they can use against you. And I wanted you to know that I won't help them. I can't undo the damage I've done, but I can at least stop making it worse. We talked for over an hour, the longest conversation we'd had since childhood. He told me about his failing business, about the reality that he would probably lose everything Dad had left him. And he told me that somewhere in that loss, he'd found something unexpected. Relief. Relief that he didn't have to keep pretending, keep performing, keep trying to prove he was worthy of love that had always been conditional on success. Before we hung up, I made a decision that surprised both of us. The foundation needs someone with business development experience, I said. Someone who understands real estate and partnerships and negotiation. If you're serious about wanting to help, about understanding what legacy really means, then come to San Francisco. Work with us. Learn what it means to build something that matters more than profit. There was a long silence. You trust me after everything I've done? Derek finally asked. No, I said honestly. But I'd give you the chance to earn that trust. That's what family does, even complicated family. We give each other chances to become better than we've been. He arrived 2 weeks later, driving down from Portland in a rental car because he'd already sold his luxury vehicles to pay debts. I met him at the Institute's entrance, both of us awkward and uncertain. He looked older than I remembered, stress and failure having aged him in ways success never had. But there was something different in his eyes too. Something like humility. Dr. Winters was skeptical about bringing him into the foundation, but she agreed to give him a trial period working with Gregory on business development strategy. Derek threw himself into the work with surprising dedication, his years of real estate experience proving unexpectedly valuable as we navigated contracts and partnerships. He learned the science slowly, sitting in on laboratory sessions and asking questions that revealed genuine curiosity rather than performative interest. One evening in late July, I found him in the archive room, reading through our mother's research journals. He looked up when I entered, his expression complicated. I never knew her, he said. I grew up with Mom, Patricia, thinking she was the only mother I'd ever had. But reading Elizabeth's words, seeing how her mind worked, I understand why Dad never stopped loving her. She was brilliant, Natalie. And you're exactly like her. I'm nothing like her, I protested. She was confident and accomplished and certain about her purpose. I'm just trying not to fail too badly at continuing what she started. Derek shook his head. That's exactly what makes you like her. She wrote in here about feeling overwhelmed, about questioning whether she was smart enough or strong enough or brave enough to finish her research. She was terrified of failure, but she kept working anyway. That's courage, Natalie. Real courage is being scared and doing it anyway. The lawsuit with Meridian Pharmaceuticals finally reached resolution in August. Our counterclaims regarding their use of illegally obtained research proved stronger than their infringement accusations. Faced with the prospect of their own patents being invalidated and potential criminal charges for industrial espionage, Meridian quietly withdrew their lawsuit and settled for a confidential sum that Gregory negotiated. The money would fund Phase 2 trials and help establish the manufacturing infrastructure we needed for eventual distribution. But more importantly, we'd proven that the foundation could defend itself. We'd faced corporate intimidation and emerged stronger, more unified, and more determined than before. The Phase 2 trials were scheduled to begin in September with 200 patients across multiple disease categories. My mother's research was moving forward exactly as she'd intended, protected by legal structures she'd built and carried forward by a daughter she'd never known but somehow understood perfectly. On the night we signed the settlement agreement with Meridian, Dr. Winters opened a bottle of champagne that had been waiting in her office for 23 years. Elizabeth gave this to me the week before she died, she explained, pouring 3 glasses for herself, Gregory, and me. She said to open it when Project Meridian entered Phase 2 trials. She believed that would be the moment we'd know her work would survive. We raised our glasses in the quiet office, the city lights of San Francisco glowing beyond the windows. To Elizabeth Chen, Dr. Winters said, "Who taught us that the most powerful legacy isn't what you leave behind, but what you inspire others to carry forward?" To my mother, I echoed. "Who left me everything that mattered?" The champagne was slightly flat after 2 decades, but it tasted like victory, like vindication, like love that had waited patiently across time to finally be celebrated. And somewhere in the space between grief and purpose, I felt my mother's presence, not as memory or imagination, but as something woven into the work itself. She lived in every protocol, every treatment, every patient who would benefit from research she'd refused to abandon even as she was dying. This was inheritance. Not property or money or conventional success, but the profound responsibility of carrying someone else's hope forward into a future they would never see. And I was ready, finally, to accept it fully. 2 years later, I stood in the same conference room where Derek had once told me I wasn't family, but everything had changed. The autumn light filtered through windows that overlooked a Portland I barely recognized anymore, though the city itself hadn't changed. Only my relationship to it had transformed. The room was filled with people this time, researchers from the Institute, patients whose lives had been altered by Project Meridian, and family members who had witnessed impossible recoveries. Robert Chen sat in the front row beside his wife Margaret, holding their granddaughter who had just turned 1. His liver function had remained stable for 26 months, a recovery his previous doctors had called miraculous until they saw the clinical data. 17 other Phase 1 patients sat scattered throughout the room, living proof that my mother's research hadn't just been theoretical brilliance but practical healing. The FDA had granted full approval for Project Meridian 3 months earlier, after Phase 3 trials demonstrated consistent safety and efficacy across multiple patient populations. We'd treated over 800 people, with success rates that exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The treatment wasn't perfect, some patients responded better than others, and we were still learning to predict individual outcomes. But it worked. My mother's vision of cellular regeneration had become medical reality. Derek stood near the back, no longer the angry son demanding his birthright but someone quieter and more substantial. He'd helped negotiate partnerships with 5 international research hospitals, ensuring Project Meridian would be available globally at costs patients could actually afford. The foundation he'd once dismissed as worthless notebooks now employed 40 researchers and had satellite facilities in 4 countries. He'd found his purpose not in inheriting my father's company but in building something that served others. Claire sat beside Patricia in the middle section, the two of them talking quietly. My relationship with Patricia would never be simple or easy. She wasn't my mother, and we'd both stopped pretending otherwise. But she'd come today, and that meant something. Some wounds don't heal completely. They just become scars you learn to carry without letting them define you. Dr. Winters called the gathering to order, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had waited decades to see a promise fulfilled. "We're here to celebrate the Chen Foundation's expansion and to honor the woman whose brilliance made all of this possible. But more importantly, we're here because Natalie Brooks chose to finish what her mother started, despite every obstacle placed in her path." The applause felt surreal. I walked to the podium, touching the small photograph of my mother I kept in my pocket, a ritual I developed over these intense years. When I looked out at the faces watching me, I saw more than success or validation. I saw the real meaning of inheritance, the understanding that what we leave behind matters far less than what we enable others to become. My mother died when I was 3 years old, I began. For most of my life, I didn't know she existed. I thought my inheritance was disappointment, that my father had loved me less than my siblings, that I was somehow not enough. But he left me something far more valuable than properties or money. He left me the truth about who I was and the work I was meant to continue. I spoke about the journey from that humiliating will reading to this moment of celebration, about learning that family isn't just blood but the people who believe in your purpose even when you doubt it yourself. I talked about my mother's research, about patients like Robert whose lives had been transformed, about the global impact we were beginning to achieve. But mostly I talked about what it means to inherit not things but responsibility, not wealth but work that outlasts any individual life. When my brother told me to get out because I wasn't family, I thought he was rejecting me, I said, looking directly at Derek. But he was actually freeing me. Because real family isn't about who shares your last name or your DNA. It's about who stands beside you when the work gets hard, who believes in what you're building, who helps carry forward something bigger than themselves. Derek's eyes were wet, and he nodded slightly. The acknowledgement between us wasn't forgiveness exactly, but something more honest. Recognition that we'd both grown beyond the people we'd been in that lawyer's office, that inheritance had taught us lessons neither of us expected. After the ceremony, people gathered in small groups sharing stories and making plans for the foundation's next phase. Isabel found me on the terrace, looking out over the city where I'd grown up feeling invisible. "You did it," she said simply. "You honored your mother's legacy and built something that will help millions of people. How does it feel?" "Overwhelming," I admitted. "Terrifying." "Right. All of those things at once." She smiled. "That's how you know it matters. Easy things don't change the world." Dr. Winters joined us, carrying 3 glasses of champagne. This time the bottle was fresh, celebrating the present rather than waiting for a future that had finally arrived. "Your mother would be incredibly proud," she said. "Not just of the science, but of the person you've become. You chose the harder path every single time, and you never compromised what she believed in." I raised my glass, thinking about all the choices that had led to this moment, about the inheritance I'd almost rejected, about the family I'd found in unexpected places. "To my mother," I said. "Who taught me that healing is hope made visible, even when she couldn't be here to see it happen." "To Elizabeth Chen," Dr. Winters echoed. "Who proved that love transcends death by becoming work that transforms the world." We drank as the sun set over Portland, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Tomorrow there would be new patients to treat, new research to conduct, new challenges to face. But tonight I simply stood in the place where my journey began, surrounded by people who had become my true family, carrying forward a legacy that had chosen me as surely as I had chosen it. My name is Natalie Rose Brooks, daughter of Elizabeth Chen and Charles Brooks, inheritor of work that will never be finished but will always matter. And I finally understood what my father meant when he wrote that I was receiving everything that mattered. Not because of what I owned, but because of what I'd been trusted to protect and advance. That was inheritance. That was family. That was love persisting across time, transforming into healing that would outlive us all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.